Corrupt judge and cop set up black woman. Regret it when she reveals she's a CIA agent in court. They arrested her under flickering streetlights on a cold, moonless night, smirking as they slapped the cuffs on her wrists. It was supposed to be an open and shut case, a minor traffic violation that spiraled into drug charges and a swift conviction. The crooked cops had done this before. They knew exactly which judge's courtroom would seal her fate. What they didn't know was that Ebony Grace Jenkins wasn't just any defendant. Beneath her calm exterior lay the training of a highly skilled CIA agent, and the darkest corners of the justice system were about to be exposed. This is the story they never saw coming. Ebony Grace Jenkins was no stranger to overcoming adversity. Born in Detroit's East Side, she was raised by a single mother who juggled 2 jobs to keep food on the table. From a young age, Ebony learned to navigate life's challenges with grace and grit. She was the girl who rose at dawn to deliver newspapers before school and stayed up past midnight to study by the dull glow of a street lamp outside her bedroom window. Even as a child, it was clear that Ebony possessed an uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure. By the time Ebony turned 18, she had already developed the habit of reading 3 newspapers a day and analyzing every piece of local and international news she could find. Her small bedroom was lined with maps and highlighted government documents that she collected from libraries. She wanted to understand how power worked, who wielded it, how it was acquired, and why it was so often abused. Little did she know that this lifelong interest in justice and governance would one day land her in one of the most secretive government agencies in the world. After high school, Ebony enrolled at the University of Michigan to study political science and international relations. She graduated top of her class, overshadowing even the most privileged students. Her performance caught the attention of recruiters from the Central Intelligence Agency, who were always on the lookout for disciplined, determined, and quick-witted individuals. Ebony fit that profile perfectly. Joining the CIA was no walk in the park. Ebony endured grueling training, physical conditioning, weapons handling, psychological evaluations, and advanced interrogation techniques. Her personal background gave her a keen sense of street smarts, while her academic achievements offered her a well-rounded global perspective. Over the years, she undertook several covert operations overseas, handled high-risk assets, and gathered intelligence that shaped national security decisions. But her profession was a secret. Officially, Ebony worked as a consultant for the State Department. She traveled under diplomatic cover, visited hotspots around the globe, and returned stateside with barely a whisper about her real work. As a black woman in a predominantly male field, she knew the importance of quiet resilience and strategic thinking. She carried these qualities like armor, wearing an unassuming smile that concealed her formidable skill set. In her early 30s, Ebony took a step back from active fieldwork to focus on domestic security issues, a role that often kept her in Washington, D.C., but also granted her more personal freedom. The everyday tasks that most people found mundane, driving to the grocery store, going to the bank, felt almost luxurious to Ebony, who had spent so much time under aliases and constant surveillance in foreign lands. One autumn day, she decided to take a short road trip to visit a friend in Fairfax, Virginia. She had heard about a cozy bed and breakfast just on the outskirts of the city, and planned to spend a few quiet days there catching up on reading and relaxation. Little did she know, her trip would bring her face to face with one of the most corrupt corners of local law enforcement she'd ever encountered. The trouble started when Ebony noticed flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. She was driving just a few miles per hour over the limit, an honest mistake she planned to rectify the moment she saw the cop. However, the officer who approached her window wore an unsettling grin. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a menacing air about him. "License and registration," he barked. Ebony calmly handed over her credentials, thinking this would be a routine traffic stop. The officer disappeared behind her SUV to run her plates, taking longer than usual. Finally, he returned, but something in his eyes had changed, like he had discovered a secret or found an opportunity. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered curtly. Ebony frowned. "Is there a problem, officer?" Now, he snapped. The hostility in his voice was palpable. Ebony complied, stepping onto the gravel shoulder of the road. The officer motioned for her to put her hands on the hood of the car. Confused but compliant, she did as told, her heart pounding not out of fear for herself but out of concern over what the officer believed he had on her. The officer patted her down. It felt excessive, invasive. She tried to remain calm, but a sense of dread began to coil in her stomach. Then, out of nowhere, another squad car pulled up. 2 more officers stepped out, both wearing similar expressions of barely concealed malice. Before Ebony could protest, one of the newly arrived officers claimed they found a small bag of white powder under the passenger seat. Ebony's eyes widened in shock. She'd never seen that bag before. She was meticulous about keeping her car clean, and she definitely never had any drugs in her possession. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest, but the officers moved quickly. They slapped cuffs on her wrists, reading her Miranda rights in a cold, dispassionate tone. In a matter of minutes, Ebony found herself in the back of a police cruiser, adrenaline pulsing through her veins. She kept her mouth shut, mentally sorting through her options. She was well aware that small-town police could be brutal, especially when they believed no one was watching. Moreover, Ebony didn't want to blow her cover as a CIA agent by raising a fuss too early. She needed time to assess the situation. As they drove to the station, the officers stayed quiet. Every once in a while, the officer riding shotgun glanced back at Ebony with a smug grin, as though already celebrating his success in bringing down yet another easy target. Ebony couldn't help but recall statistics she'd read about systemic racism in the justice system, especially in certain counties with questionable law enforcement records. This might be one of those places, she thought grimly. "Look at this," said the driver to his partner in a low voice, raising Ebony's driver's license. "Ebony Grace Jenkins from DC Bet. She thinks she's real important. Let's see how important she is when the judge sees these charges." His partner snickered. "Yeah, well, Judge Kincaid always knows how to handle them." Ebony mentally filed away the name. Judge Kincaid. She had no idea who he was, but something told her he wasn't a fair, impartial man. In her line of work, Ebony had encountered warlords and despots. She knew how power could corrupt. Even so, the realization that her own country's justice system harbored such corruption was sobering. When they arrived at the station, she was processed. Fingerprints taken. Mugshot snapped. Personal belongings confiscated. She was then led down a corridor lined with stained walls and flickering fluorescent lights to a cramped holding cell. The smell of sweat and disinfectant made her nostrils flare. The single bench was hard and cold. Ebony sat down with a calm she'd learned to perfect in CIA training. But inside her mind raced with questions. Who had orchestrated this? Why? Was she just an unlucky victim of a corrupt system, or was someone specifically targeting her? Over the next few hours, she was left alone. Occasionally, an officer would walk by, sneering or making a derogatory remark about her so-called drug habit. Ebony said nothing, stoically enduring the humiliation. Eventually, a female officer came by to escort Ebony to an interrogation room. The woman seemed indifferent, but not overtly hostile. Still, Ebony couldn't trust anyone here. Inside the stark interrogation room, Ebony faced 2 male officers, including the one who had pulled her over. He introduced himself as Officer Jeffries, while his partner was Officer Delgado. Jeffries leaned over the metal table, his knuckles resting on its surface. "Tell us where you got the drugs," he demanded. Ebony shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about. Those drugs aren't mine." Jeffries smirked. "Of course. None of you people ever own up to it." A flash of anger shot through Ebony, but she suppressed it. CIA training taught her that anger was a tool best used strategically, not unleashed carelessly. She just stared at Jeffries, refusing to show weakness. Delgado took his turn, flipping open a file. "Your record is squeaky clean, Ebony Jenkins," Delgado said, sounding almost impressed. "No priors, no parking tickets, nothing. Yet we found a bag of cocaine in your car. Care to explain that discrepancy?" Ebony's nostrils flared again, but her voice remained even. It was planted. Officer Jeffries laughed, glancing at Delgado with mocking amusement. That's a new one. So you're claiming we planted it or some random stranger planted it? Ebony folded her arms. I'm claiming I'm innocent. Tell that to the judge, Jeffries said. He's known to be tough on drug offenders. You're looking at a felony possession charge. That's a nice chunk of prison time if convicted. Without giving her another chance to speak, they ended the interrogation and escorted her back to the holding cell. Ebony's mind raced. She needed a plan. Yes, she had her CIA credentials, but using them prematurely might compromise her current role and compromise any chance of building a case against these corrupt officers. It was crucial to handle this carefully. Ebony needed to see how deep this corruption went, and who exactly was pulling the strings. A short while later, a tired-looking public defender entered the cell block, calling for Ebony Jenkins. The lawyer, whose name tag read Maria Alvarez, approached Ebony, rummaging through a stack of documents. She was disheveled, as though she had far too many cases to handle. Miss Jenkins, I'll be representing you at the arraignment, Maria said briskly. We need to go over the details. Ebony glanced at the guard, who seemed preoccupied with his phone, then lowered her voice. I'm not guilty. The cops planted those drugs. Maria sighed as if she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. Do you have any proof? Ebony shook her head. Not yet. Maria rubbed her temples. Then it's your word against the police. Around here, that's not going to cut it, especially in front of Judge Kincaid. He's particularly strict with drug offenses. He's known to give the maximum sentence. Ebony narrowed her eyes. She needed time to strategize. Let's just get to the arraignment, she said. I want to see the judge and understand the lay of the land. Maria nodded, though she seemed skeptical that anything could save Ebony from the swift machinery of local justice. Ebony, however, had no intention of letting some corrupt officers and a biased judge ruin her life. She had taken down cartels and terrorists. She wasn't about to be beaten by small-town power players. One question, though, loomed large in her mind. Would revealing her CIA status cause more harm than good at this point? She had to tread carefully, because once that cat was out of the bag, there would be no going back. The morning sun filtered through the smudged windows of the courthouse lobby, illuminating specks of dust as Ebony stood in handcuffs beside Maria Alvarez. The corridor was crowded with other defendants, lawyers hurrying in and out of courtrooms, and uniformed officers stationed at every turn. Ebony's mind churned with possibilities, escape plans, alternative strategies, secret methods to contact her handler at Langley without raising suspicion. But she forced herself to remain calm. Patience was often the key to unraveling corruption. Maria led Ebony into the courtroom. The place had an imposing aura, with dark wood paneling, high ceilings, and rows of benches filled with spectators and family members. At the front sat Judge Horace Kincaid, a stern figure in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a perpetual scowl. He wore his robe like it was a monarch's cloak, giving curt nods to the attorneys who approached the bench. As Ebony was led to the defense table, she discreetly assessed the judge's body language. Shoulders rigid, jaw tight. A man accustomed to holding power. When he called Ebony's case, the bailiff announced the charge. Felony possession of a controlled substance. Ebony felt the weight of the words as they echoed through the courtroom. State your plea, Judge Kincaid said in a gruff voice. Maria spoke for Ebony, entering a plea of not guilty. The prosecutor, a wiry man with glasses named Gerald Polk, outlined the charges, portraying Ebony as a dangerous criminal who tried to smuggle narcotics. Something in the way the prosecutor spoke, his feigned outrage, struck Ebony as performative. He made sure to emphasize Ebony's full name, her race, and the fact that she was from out of town. It painted her as an outsider, an intruder on their pristine community. Judge Kincaid peered down from his bench. You'll be held without bail pending trial, Miss Jenkins. Given the severity of the charges and the possibility of flight risk, this court finds it necessary to keep you detained. Maria tried to object, pointing out Ebony's clean record and stable background, But Kincaid waved her off, hammering the gavel with a resounding crack that echoed through the room. Ebony stood motionless, her face expressionless as the bailiff escorted her back out. Inside, though, her anger simmered. No bail? This was highly unusual for a first-time offense with no prior record. The fix was in. In the holding area, Ebony finally had a moment to speak with Maria again. She leaned in, keeping her voice low. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Maria nodded grimly. "All the time, unfortunately. The judge, the prosecutor, the local cops, they have a tight network. Once they set their sights on someone, it's tough to break free." "Why do they do it?" Ebony asked. Maria pursed her lips. "Partly money, partly power. Some people claim Judge Kincaid has stakes in private prisons. More convictions mean more profits. The prosecutor uses high conviction rates to climb the political ladder. And as for the cops, well, some of them might be on the judge's payroll, or they just enjoy exerting power over people they consider lesser." Ebony swallowed. She'd witnessed corruption in foreign nations, but seeing it here in the so-called land of the free was infuriating. "I need to make a call," Ebony stated. Maria studied Ebony with concern. "The cops here rarely allow calls that aren't monitored. Be careful what you say. If you have friends in high places, maybe that's your ace in the hole, but it'll also make you a target." Ebony gave a faint smile. "I can handle myself." Maria raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. She promised to keep working on Ebony's defense and left for her next case. Ebony was led back to a detention facility that partnered with the local county jail, an ironically modern, well-equipped place rumored to be linked to the private prison system the judge was allegedly profiting from. The facility's interior was clean but oppressive. The fluorescent lights never fully dimmed, leaving inmates in a state of perpetual half-day, half-night. The correctional officers patrolled with a sense of smug authority. Ebony quickly observed that many of the inmates were people of color, mostly jailed on drug-related charges. It confirmed her suspicion that this was a well-oiled machine designed to churn out convictions. After a few days, Ebony finally got her monitored phone call. She dialed a number from memory, reaching one of her CIA contacts. She kept her words vague, referencing only that she was caught up in a legal matter in this specific county. She emphasized the need for documentation to prove her identity, but also insisted that her contact not blow the operation wide open just yet. She wanted to see how far the corruption extended. The conversation was brief but enough to put certain wheels in motion. In the meantime, Ebony tried to keep a low profile within the detention center. However, news spreads fast among inmates, and soon enough, she became a point of interest, an out-of-towner with an aura of quiet confidence. Some of the other women approached her, seeking advice or simply curious about why she wasn't visibly scared. A few correctional officers even took note of her composure and seemed unsettled by it. "Hey, Miss Jenkins," one officer sneered as he passed by her cell. "Heard you think you're better than the rest of us. We'll see about that when Kincaid puts you away." Ebony ignored the taunt. She spent her days reading whatever books she could find in the jail's small library, focusing on law and personal accounts of wrongful convictions. She wanted to arm herself with knowledge she would weaponize once she stepped into the courtroom again. One afternoon, she was called out of her cell for a surprise visitor. Expecting Maria or perhaps a CIA contact, Ebony was instead greeted by the smirking face of Officer Jeffries, the one who had initially pulled her over. He stood in the visiting area, arms crossed over his chest. "Your lawyer's busy," he drawled. "I came to offer you a deal." Ebony stepped forward cautiously, the glass partition between them. "What kind of deal?" Jeffries pressed the phone to his ear. "Kincaid's looking for an easy conviction. Plead guilty, do 5 years. That's better than the 10 or 15 you'll get if you fight it. Word is the prosecutor has additional evidence, some damning stuff they're ready to plant on you if you don't cooperate." Ebony felt her heart rate spike, but she maintained her composure. "And how do you figure this helps me?" Jeffrey shrugged. "You get out sooner. 5 years is a cakewalk compared to what Kincaid can dish out. Maybe you keep your head down, serve your time, and this all goes away." Ebony stared at him through the glass. "You and your buddies must be really confident." He leaned in, arrogance dripping from his voice. "We always are. This county is ours. The old folks don't ask questions, the politicians look the other way, and the feds don't care. If you were somebody important, you'd have gotten out by now. But you're not." Ebony almost laughed, but she held it in. If only he knew the truth. "No thanks," she said. "I'll take my chances at trial." Jeffries gave her a hard look before hanging up the phone and walking away. Ebony watched him go, her pulse pounding. She was more determined than ever to see this through. That night she composed a coded letter to her CIA liaison, describing what she believed to be a wide-reaching corruption scheme. She tucked the letter into an envelope and handed it off to the one trustworthy guard she'd identified, a woman named Officer Bernice Miller, who seemed disillusioned by the system but too afraid to speak out. The next day, Ebony was surprised by a face she recognized from the old days at Langley, Agent David Turner. He arrived in plain clothes, passing himself off as her cousin. He and Ebony sat at a table in the visitation area, their conversation laced with code words to avoid detection. "I hear Aunt Mildred is worried sick," David said, referring to the higher-ups at the agency. "She wants to help, but not at the expense of causing a family rift." Translation: the CIA was willing to intervene but didn't want to blow Ebony's cover on a grand scale yet. "I appreciate that," Ebony replied, "but my new neighbors are causing quite a stir. It might be time to bring the extended family together for a little reunion." Translation: Ebony wanted the CIA to gather evidence and build a case against the corrupt officials. David leaned forward. "Aunt Mildred said to give you this." He slid a small envelope across the table. Ebony understood it would contain some coded references, possibly a phone number or a means to contact a safe house. He glanced around, then added, "Be careful. We've heard these folks don't play nice." Ebony nodded subtly. They'll get what's coming to them. After David left, Ebony felt a renewed sense of purpose. She tucked the envelope inside her jumpsuit, planning to read it at the next opportunity. Despite the grim surroundings and the uncertainty of her situation, her training as a CIA agent gave her an edge. These corrupt cops and judge might run the local show, but they hadn't reckoned with the long arm of federal oversight, especially not the CIA. Word began to spread among the inmates that Ebony was planning to fight. Some told her she was crazy, that she should just take the plea and hope for an early parole. Others admired her bravery, offering quiet encouragement. Ebony absorbed it all, calmly biding her time. She was determined to expose this rot at its core. She could sense the tide beginning to shift, even if only slightly. The mere fact that Jeffries had offered a deal suggested the corrupt network saw her as a threat. They wanted to neutralize her quickly. Too bad for them, Ebony Jenkins was anything but an easy target. The following week, Ebony was called into court for a pre-trial hearing. She was led through the courthouse in handcuffs, passing by dingy hallways that reeked of stale coffee and desperation. Maria Alvarez met her outside the courtroom, looking slightly more optimistic than before. "I've filed a motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence," Maria said quietly as they entered the courtroom. "I don't expect it to succeed, but at least it might reveal the prosecution's hand." Ebony nodded, scanning the room for the presence of any local journalists or curious bystanders who might be taking notes. She spotted none, further proof that this courthouse operated under a veil of secrecy, free from media scrutiny. When the hearing began, Prosecutor Gerald Polk recited the facts as if reading from a script. He claimed that an informant had tipped off the police about Ebony transporting drugs, and that gave Officer Jeffries probable cause to search her car. Ebony noticed how meticulously the prosecution fabricated evidence to bolster their case. Whoever was behind this was more organized than she initially thought. Maria cross-examined the officers, but they stuck to their false testimonies. Judge Kincaid listened with a bored expression. Finally, after all arguments were heard, he predictably denied the motion to dismiss. Ebony watched as a faint smirk tugged at the corner of Kincaid's mouth. He enjoyed this charade. As the bailiff escorted Ebony out, she caught a glimpse of the small figure of an older woman in the gallery. The woman was clearly distressed, wringing her hands as she whispered to a nearby man. Ebony realized that multiple cases were being processed that morning. Perhaps the woman was a relative of another defendant. Ebony couldn't help but wonder how many families Judge Kincaid had torn apart for profit or personal gain. Back at the detention center, Ebony pored over the contents of the envelope Agent David Turner had slipped her. It included a series of numbers, coordinates perhaps, and a phone number with a note instructing her to memorize it and destroy the paper. She quickly committed the information to memory. The final line read, "Approval given for limited exposure. Proceed with caution." Ebony interpreted this to mean that if it became absolutely necessary, she could reveal her CIA status. The agency would back her up. However, they wanted her to gather as much evidence as possible before making a move. The CIA was fully aware that local corruption could be a gateway to larger criminal networks. Sometimes these small-town judges and cops had ties to organized crime or even terrorist funding. If Ebony could expose a broader conspiracy, all the better. Later that evening, Officer Bernice Miller discreetly slipped Ebony a prepaid phone, no bigger than a credit card, wrapped in a cleaning rag. The phone was untraceable, courtesy of Ebony's contacts. She mouthed the words, "Be careful," before quickly walking away. Ebony hid the phone under her mattress, grateful for the small window of opportunity this device offered. Ebony bided her time until lights out, then quietly activated the phone. She dialed the special number from the note, a line that connected her directly to a CIA secure server. When someone picked up, she spoke in code. "This is Traveler 426 checking in," she whispered. "The situation is compromised. Request immediate support. Also requesting deeper intel on local assets. Codename, Gavel." There was a pause, then a voice responded. "Stand by, Traveler 426. Support inbound. Data requested will be delivered within 48 hours. Ebony ended the call, heart pounding. The wheels were in motion. She just had to stay alive and keep her composure until the CIA could move. Meanwhile, in a dark corner office of the courthouse, Judge Kincaid sat at his large mahogany desk, counting stacks of bills delivered to him by a local businessman rumored to be involved in drug trafficking. The arrangement was simple. Kincaid ensured drug charges stuck, and those convicted ended up in facilities owned by Kincaid's associates. Money circulated back in the form of kickbacks and campaign contributions. The local police, especially Officer Jeffries and his crew, played their part by ensuring a steady flow of arrests. Kincaid glanced at the docket for the following week, noticing Ebony Jenkins' trial date. He frowned. Something about her case felt riskier than the usual low-level arrests. She was too poised, too unshaken. He pressed a button on his phone. Moments later, Prosecutor Gerald Polk stepped into the office. "How's Jenkins?" Kincaid asked. Polk shrugged. "She's got a public defender who's surprisingly persistent. Still, we've got more than enough fake evidence to lock her away. Unless—" Kincaid's stare hardened. "Unless what?" Polk cleared his throat. "She has connections. She's not talking much, and that concerns me. Most defendants at this point would be begging for a plea deal." Kincaid tapped his fingers on the desk. "Make sure Jeffries and his team keep an eye on her. I don't want any surprises." Polk nodded and left, leaving Kincaid to brood in silence. An uneasy feeling gnawed at him, rare for a man accustomed to absolute control. Over at the county jail, Ebony received a sealed folder discreetly slid under her cell door by Officer Miller. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a small CIA insignia at the corner, barely visible except to those who knew what to look for. The sheet listed a series of names: Judge Horace Kincaid, Prosecutor Gerald Polk, Officer Samuel Jeffries, and a few others Ebony recognized from the station. Next to each name were cryptic notes about suspicious financial transactions and possible connections to organized crime. It also detailed an ongoing Department of Justice inquiry into allegations of racketeering within the local government, though it appeared that inquiry had stalled for lack of concrete evidence. Ebony's eyes narrowed as she read the final line. Prepare to present intel in open court if strategic advantage can be secured. So the agency wanted her to blow the lid off this operation in the most public way possible, during her trial. That carried a great deal of risk. Exposing her CIA status in a local courtroom could cause a media firestorm. Yet, if done right, it would bring immediate federal scrutiny to Kincaid, Polk, and the corrupt cops. Ebony understood that this might be the only way to finally end their reign. The next day, Ebony waited for the perfect opportunity to test how deeply the corruption extended. She requested a meeting with the warden, claiming she had information that could reduce her sentence. She was escorted to the warden's office, a cramped space decorated with cheap motivational posters. The warden was a stout man named Roger Matthews, his mustache stained yellow from coffee. "What's this about?" Warden Matthews asked. Ebony gave a practiced smile. "I have information about a large drug operation in this county. Judge Kincaid's name has come up more than once. I'm willing to share details in exchange for certain considerations in my case." Matthews leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're accusing Judge Kincaid of being involved in drugs?" Ebony feigned ignorance. "I'm just telling you what I heard. You can do what you want with the information." Matthews scoffed. "A person in your position should be careful about slander. Kincaid is a pillar of this community." Ebony continued. "He might be a pillar, but pillars can crack. All I need is a chance to talk to some investigators, federal investigators perhaps, and I can lay out the names." Matthews leaned back in his chair, wearing a smug grin. "You think you can blackmail your way out of felony charges? Let me give you a piece of advice. Keep your mouth shut. This place has a way of making troublemakers very uncomfortable." Ebony recognized the threat. She shrugged nonchalantly, as if uninterested. "Your call." She left the office, having confirmed her suspicion. The corruption ran through every level of local authority, including the warden. Now, Ebony was certain that the only way out was through a public, high-stakes showdown. Back in her cell, Ebony sensed something had shifted. That night she was awoken by the clank of keys and the squeak of the heavy metal door. Officer Jeffries and 2 other guards entered. One guard carried a baton, the other had a taser. Ebony stood, muscles tensed. "Time to move you," Jeffries said, his grin malevolent in the dim light. "Why?" Ebony asked calmly. "No questions," he snapped. They led her down the corridor. The overhead lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows along the cinder-block walls. Ebony's mind raced. Was this a sanctioned transfer or an off-the-books intimidation tactic? They stepped into an isolated area, one Ebony recognized as the solitary confinement wing. The stench of mildew and human despair was overwhelming. Jeffries opened a cell door, directing the other 2 guards to shove Ebony inside. She stumbled but quickly regained her footing. Before leaving, Jeffries spoke through the small window slot. "You keep poking around. You're gonna end up in a worse place than this." "Understood." Ebony didn't reply, staring him down until he slammed the slot shut. She took a slow breath, letting the darkness envelop her. This was their attempt at breaking her spirit, at silencing any inclination she had to expose them. But Ebony had been through more harrowing situations: CIA black sites, infiltration missions in enemy territory. The darkness here was nothing compared to the darkness of a war-torn battlefield. She could handle it. The solitary confinement cell was small and cold, with a narrow cot and a toilet. Daylight didn't reach here, and the overhead light was kept on a dim, disorienting glow at all hours. Ebony decided to use the time to mentally rehearse her strategy for the upcoming trial. She ran through CIA interrogation counter techniques, breathing exercises, and memory recall drills to keep her mind sharp. She had come too far to crumble under the petty tyranny of small-town tyrants. Meanwhile, outside her cell, the jail staff whispered among themselves about Jenkins's mysterious confidence, fueling rumors that maybe she was more than just an unlucky traveler. Officers Jeffries and Delgado, however, continued to brag that they had a handle on her. After all, how dangerous could one woman be if she was locked away? They had no idea that Ebony Jenkins was about to unleash a storm, one that would shake their entire corrupt empire to its foundation. Days bled into nights in the cramped solitude of Ebony's cell. She counted the hours by the shifts in the faint humming of the ventilation system. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she was pulled out of solitary confinement and escorted back to the main holding area. Her court date was approaching, and even Judge Kincaid had to maintain the appearance of due process. Maria Alvarez paid her a hurried visit. "They've set the trial for next week," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose in a nervous gesture. "The prosecution is confident. They claim to have an anonymous tipster willing to testify that you were running drugs." Ebony smirked. "Let them have their show. We'll be ready." Maria looked at Ebony like she was crazy. "Ready with what? We barely have any evidence. It's your word against the entire county law enforcement structure." Ebony placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "Trust me, there's more to this than you know. Just do your part." Maria sighed heavily, but nodded. Ebony could tell the public defender was torn between skepticism and a glimmer of hope. If Ebony was somehow telling the truth, it might be the biggest case of Maria's career. Once Maria left, Ebony was approached by Officer Bernice Miller in a deserted corridor, out of sight from the other guards. Miller handed Ebony a small slip of paper, careful to keep her voice low. "Your new cell is D14. Check under the bed frame. That's all I can say." Ebony slipped the note into her jumpsuit and thanked Miller with a curt nod, aware that any sign of warmth or camaraderie might tip off the other guards. Later, she was indeed moved to cell D14. As she slipped onto the narrow mattress, she felt her fingers brushing against a small rectangular object taped beneath the metal frame. She waited until lights out, then carefully peeled it free, a tiny flash drive. Ebony's heart pounded. What did it contain? How would she access it? She needed a computer. Fortunately, the jail's law library had a single outdated PC, which inmates could use under supervision. She'd have to be cunning. The next day, Ebony requested access to the law library, under the pretense of wanting to review case law for her upcoming trial. A stern-faced guard escorted her, standing watch near the door. Ebony inserted the flash drive into the computer, opening a single folder labeled Second Wind. Inside were documents, photos, and short videos. Some were financial records showing large sums of money transferred into accounts linked to Judge Kincaid and Prosecutor Polk. Others were phone recordings of Kincaid openly discussing sentencing lengths with prison officials in exchange for kickbacks. One video, time-stamped just a week earlier, showed a hidden camera view of Officer Jeffries meeting with a known drug trafficker. Their conversation revolved around Ebony Jenkins, her arrest, the planted drugs, and the need to keep her in line. Ebony nearly gasped. This was a smoking gun, more than enough to implicate the entire ring. She quickly memorized the contents, knowing she couldn't leave the flash drive in the computer too long or risk detection. Logging out, Ebony casually removed the drive and slipped it back into her jumpsuit. She could feel the guard's suspicious gaze, but he said nothing as he led her back to her cell. That evening, Ebony composed a coded letter to her CIA contact, referencing the crucial details she discovered. The trial date arrived faster than Ebony expected. She was awakened at dawn, handed a set of street clothes, cheap black slacks and a white blouse, and told to get dressed. Maria arrived shortly after to escort her to the courthouse. They were led through a side entrance, avoiding the main crowd. Even so, Ebony could see a few local onlookers milling about, curious to witness the drug trafficker's trial. Inside the courtroom, Judge Kincaid presided like a grim monarch. The jurors filed in, most of them middle-aged, predominantly white folks who eyed Ebony with a mixture of suspicion and pity. Prosecutor Polk wasted no time in painting Ebony as a cunning trafficker who used her respectable demeanor as a cover. He presented the bag of cocaine as evidence, along with the testimony of Officer Jeffries, who repeated his fabricated story about receiving an anonymous tip. Maria tried to object, pointing out the lack of corroboration, but Judge Kincaid overruled her at every turn. The tone in the courtroom was heavily skewed toward the prosecution. The final nail seemed to come when a so-called anonymous tipster, whose face was hidden behind a screen at the judge's direction, claimed that Ebony had been seen making multiple drug deals. By the time the prosecution rested, Maria looked nearly defeated. She whispered to Ebony, "They've stacked the deck so thoroughly, I don't see a way out of this." Ebony placed a reassuring hand on Maria's forearm. "Just wait. I'll be taking the stand." Maria's eyes widened. "That's risky. They'll eat you alive on cross-examination." Ebony gave a small, confident smile. "Trust me." When it was Ebony's turn, she rose and took the stand. She locked eyes with the jurors, her presence emanating a calm authority she had cultivated through years of CIA fieldwork. "Miss Jenkins," Maria began, "could you tell the court in your own words why you believe these charges are false?" Ebony took a breath, her voice steady. "I'm not just a random defendant. I work for the Central Intelligence Agency." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Kincaid's gavel thundered. "Order! Order in the court!" The jurors exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. Prosecutor Polk stood abruptly, face reddening. "Objection. This is irrelevant and an obvious ploy for sympathy." Ebony turned her gaze to the judge. "With all due respect, Your Honor, my occupation is central to my defense. The CIA can verify my identity. I have documentation." Kincaid looked like he'd swallowed a hornet's nest. For a moment he stammered, unable to hide his fear and anger. This is highly irregular. Miss Jenkins, if you're lying about this, you'll be held in contempt." Ebony nodded calmly. "Understood. But I'm not lying." Maria handed over a packet of documents to the clerk, which Ebony had managed to receive through her CIA contact. The clerk glanced at them, then hesitantly approached the bench. Kincaid skimmed the top pages, and if Ebony wasn't mistaken, she saw genuine panic in his eyes. "Members of the jury," Ebony continued, "I was on personal leave traveling through this county. I was pulled over and arrested on false charges. I've since discovered evidence that points to widespread corruption within this courthouse, law enforcement, and possibly beyond. I request that these documents be admitted into evidence." Polk tried to object again, but the murmuring in the courtroom was reaching a fever pitch. Some of the jurors leaned forward, curiosity overshadowing doubt. With no graceful way out, Judge Kincaid glared at Ebony. "Fine, we'll admit them for now, but I warn you, Miss Jenkins, if this is some elaborate stunt—" Ebony cut him off, her tone razor-sharp. "It's not a stunt, Your Honor. In fact, I have a flash drive containing audio and video proof of Officer Jeffries planting drugs in my car, as well as conversations implicating members of your court." She held up the tiny device, letting the overhead lights glint off its metallic surface. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Prosecutor Polk shouted to object, but Kincaid couldn't restore order quickly enough. Several people in the gallery stood, straining to see what Ebony was holding. Maria wore a look of astonishment, as though even she hadn't expected something this explosive. Judge Kincaid slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Silence! Everyone will remain silent or I'll clear the courtroom." Ebony remained standing, unflinching. She had the initiative now, and she wasn't about to relinquish it. "I request an immediate review of this evidence," she said. "I also request that the FBI or the Department of Justice be contacted to investigate, as my agency cannot directly intervene in domestic affairs beyond providing my own documentation." Kincaid's face was white with fear and rage. He glanced at the clock, then at Prosecutor Polk, who looked equally terrified. For a split second, Ebony thought Kincaid might order her arrest on contempt of court or some fabricated charge. But the cat was out of the bag. Any drastic move now would only confirm his guilt. "Court is in recess," Kincaid finally announced, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "We'll reconvene after lunch to review this so-called evidence." He banged the gavel so hard that it echoed like thunder in the tense courtroom. As people began to file out, Ebony locked eyes with Kincaid and saw something she had never seen before in the face of a man who claimed absolute power. Real fear. The courthouse corridors bustled with frantic energy, as soon as the judge called for recess. Whispered conversations crackled like static electricity in every corner. A few reporters who had shown up to cover a routine drug trial now sensed they had stumbled into the scoop of the year. Ebony was escorted to a small holding room, where Maria Alvarez joined her moments later. Her face was flushed with exhilaration. "I had no idea you were actually CIA." Ebony offered a tight-lipped smile. "I needed to keep it under wraps until the right moment. Now that moment is here." Before Maria could respond, the door creaked open. In stepped a tall, middle-aged man in a crisp suit, an FBI agent, judging by his ID badge. Behind him stood another agent, a woman with a determined expression. They introduced themselves as Special Agents Rogers and Timmons. "We received a call from the CIA," Rogers said, his tone curt but professional. "They indicated we might find cause to investigate. We're here to collect and review the evidence you mentioned." Ebony handed him the flash drive. "There are also documents and testimonies. It'll all point to Judge Kincaid, Officer Jeffries, Prosecutor Polk, and others." Rogers nodded, inserting the flash drive into a secure laptop he carried. Timmons set up a small device that looked like a portable data scanner. They began to comb through the files, occasionally exchanging glances of surprise or disgust. "This is extensive," Timmons remarked. "Bribery, conspiracy to commit perjury, false arrest, evidence tampering. It's a laundry list." Rogers looked up at Ebony. "If this checks out, and it looks like it does, you've done the FBI's job for us. We've had an open file on corruption in this county, but never had enough tangible proof to go after the big players." Maria chimed in, her voice still quivering with disbelief. "So what happens now?" Rogers squared his shoulders. "We'll brief our superiors. Ideally, we want to arrest the suspects simultaneously, to avoid tipping anyone off. Miss Jenkins, we'll also need your sworn statement." Ebony nodded. "Of course." Across the courthouse, Judge Kincaid was in his chambers, gripping the edge of his desk with shaking hands. Prosecutor Polk stood nearby, his tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is a disaster," Kincaid hissed. "That woman was CIA? Why didn't we see it coming?" Polk ran a trembling hand through his hair. "We tried to dig into her background, but everything came back sanitized. We figured she was just some nobody from D.C. Kincaid stared at the wall, mind racing. He considered trying to flee, but that would be too obvious. "We have to do damage control. Maybe we can claim entrapment or a breach of procedure. Or we can say the evidence is fabricated." "It's too late for that," Polk responded grimly. "The FBI's already here. We're done." Kincaid tightened his jaw, his eyes flashing with desperation. "Not if we discredit her. Go out there and accuse her of forging the footage. Demand the court not admit it until we can verify its authenticity. Stall for time." Polk nodded, though he looked unconvinced. They both knew the end was near. When court reconvened, the tension was palpable. The jury shuffled in, faces etched with curiosity. Judge Kincaid took the bench, looking paler than before. Prosecutor Polk stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, the defense has submitted so-called evidence that we have not had a chance to authenticate," Polk said. "We request that it be deemed inadmissible until a thorough forensic analysis can be performed." Maria rose to respond, but Special Agent Rogers entered the courtroom, stepping up to the prosecution's table with confident authority. He addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Rogers with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We've conducted a preliminary verification of the digital files in question. Our experts confirm there's no sign of tampering. We have reason to believe it is authentic." Kincaid's face remained a rigid mask, but his eyes betrayed him. "Agent Rogers, the court appreciates your input, but the chain of custody is questionable." Rogers cut him off, a rare move in a courtroom. "We're prepared to secure an official chain of custody right now, Your Honor. And given the nature of these allegations, corruption within the court itself, we have grounds to request a federal injunction on these proceedings." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Ebony watched the jurors, some looking confused, others intrigued. She could almost see the cogs in their minds turning, the realization dawning that their own judge might be a criminal. Finally, Kincaid cleared his throat. The court will take a brief recess to confer with federal authorities. But Rogers wasn't done. Respectfully, Your Honor, we have federal warrants ready to serve. We request that you remain present while our team executes those warrants. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Kincaid's voice cracked. On whom exactly? Rogers' gaze flicked to Prosecutor Polk and then back to the judge. We have warrants for the arrest of Prosecutor Gerald Polk and Officer Samuel Jeffries. There's also a sealed warrant that may be unsealed pending further evidence. Kincaid's knuckles whitened around his gavel, which he held but didn't bang. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom who the sealed warrant was for. In the chaos that followed, armed FBI agents swarmed into the courthouse. Officer Jeffries, seated in the gallery, tried to slip away, but two agents quickly apprehended him. The jurors watched in wide-eyed astonishment as the prosecution's star witness was handcuffed and read his Miranda rights. Prosecutor Polk, pale as a sheet, stammered protests about due process, while an agent calmly recited the charges against him. Judge Kincaid, seeing the unstoppable wave crashing down, attempted one last stance of defiance. This is highly irregular. I won't allow federal interference in my courtroom. Agent Rogers stepped forward, voice resolute. With all due respect, Your Honor, we're acting under federal authority to investigate allegations of corruption in this county's judicial system. We have reason to believe you're involved. The hush that fell over the courtroom was profound. Kincaid's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. I had no knowledge of this, he finally sputtered. Rogers handed the sealed warrant to a nearby agent, who opened it and nodded. Rogers turned back to Kincaid. Your Honor, you are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, bribery, and corruption. Kincaid's gavel slipped from his hand, clattering onto the bench. Two FBI agents approached, and for a moment it looked like Kincaid might resist. He glowered at Ebony, who met his gaze with cold resolve. You'll regret this, he hissed as the agents escorted him away. Ebony watched in silence as the local tyrant was removed from his own domain. The feeling of justice, long overdue, washed over her. Maria stood next to her, mouth agape. In the days that followed, the story became a national headline. Major networks picked up the news. Corrupt judge, cops, and prosecutor arrested. Defendant revealed as CIA agent. Ebony's identity was no longer a secret, though the CIA worked quickly to manage the press, limiting any potential fallout or security risks. They released a brief statement confirming Ebony Jenkins was indeed an operative on personal leave, and that they were cooperating with the FBI's ongoing investigation. The Department of Justice launched a full-scale probe, and more local officials fell under scrutiny. Bank records, phone logs, and witness testimonies flooded in, revealing a sprawling web of corruption that reached city council members, private prison liaisons, and even a few state-level politicians. The name Kincaid became synonymous with judicial bribery, and dozens of prior convictions from his court were re-examined, leading to appeals and overturned sentences. Ebony found herself at the center of a media storm. Many praised her courage. Others questioned the CIA's involvement in domestic affairs. But Ebony knew her conscience was clear. She had fought to expose a grave injustice, not to forward any hidden agenda. When reporters asked her why she risked blowing her cover, she simply said, "No one is above the law, not even those who wear the robes of justice or the badges of law enforcement." Maria Alvarez's once fledgling career skyrocketed. She became a sought-after attorney, featured in prominent legal magazines for her role in uncovering systemic corruption. Despite the sudden limelight, Maria remained humble, giving credit to Ebony and the courageous whistleblowers who helped them. Officer Bernice Miller, the guard who had quietly aided Ebony, also stepped forward to testify. Her conscience couldn't bear witnessing the corruption any longer. She resigned from the department and offered crucial insights into the bribery and intimidation tactics used to maintain silence within the jail. As for Ebony, The CIA granted her a brief leave of absence to recover from the ordeal and handle the fallout of her public unmasking. She returned to Washington, D.C., where she found a small measure of peace in knowing she had struck a significant blow against a corrupt institution. Agents David Turner and the others who assisted her discreetly congratulated her, but they also urged her to lie low. Ebony understood the importance of caution. There were likely still enemies out there, people who had lost money or influence because of her actions. Yet Ebony felt a renewed sense of purpose. No longer did she see her job merely as a faceless entity within a sprawling intelligence bureaucracy. Now, she understood the true meaning of protecting American values. Sometimes the threat to justice came not from foreign soil, but from within. In the aftermath, Ebony kept in touch with Maria. They formed a bond forged in adversity, sharing notes on legal strategy and updates on the ongoing investigations. Through her CIA contacts, Ebony even helped direct some federal oversight resources to ensure the newly appointed judges and prosecutors were free from the corruption that had plagued the county. Justice, for once, had the final word. And there you have it, the gripping, true-to-life tale of a small-town conspiracy so confident in its power that it never saw Ebony Jenkins coming. A brilliant CIA agent on a simple vacation, caught in a web of lies and deceit that stretched all the way to the highest seat in the local courtroom. With courage, resourcefulness, and the backing of the very agency no one suspected, Ebony shattered their toxic empire, proving that justice can prevail, even when it hides in the shadows. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share with friends who love a good showdown against corruption, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories that reveal the hidden battles of everyday heroes. By sharing, you help us continue telling tales that inspire and remind us all. The truth can't be silenced.